Andrew Collins was born in Essex in the UK and is a science and history writer and the author of over 15 books that challenge the way we think about the past. Andrew Collins, it is a privilege and an honor to interview you today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So your new book, Origins of the Gods, is complete with a foreword from the legendary Erich von Däniken. And in this book, you take the ancient alien astronauts theory to a whole new level, and you refer to them as transdimensional beings. Can you explain to me the word transdimensional?
Transdimensional refers to the ability of intelligences, consciousness, or individual beings to be able to cross from a higher dimensional state into the three-dimensional realm of space and one dimension of time that we live in today. And there is evidence from a string theory, particularly an area of string theory known as M theory, that suggests that our whole universe actually floats within a higher dimensional realm that's referred to as the bulk. And this is 11 dimensions in total, and that we float within that, and that our universe is just one of many of these, what they refer to as brains or brain worlds, each of which have their own laws of physics. And obviously we have our own laws, which, you know, clearly science has investigated and is aware of, but others coexist with us that can occasionally either buck up against ours and possibly allowing communication to take place. But also there is a possibility that these other brain worlds, these other existences, these other universes can actually overlay our own at certain times, and that when this does, there is a bleed through from one to the other. And this could very easily help to explain the presence within our midst of everything from UFO intelligences, you know, structured craft, but also things like cryptids that appear at certain locations around the globe as if they turn up out of nowhere and are around for a period of time, probably, you know, a few weeks, and then just vanish back to where they seem to have come from originally. Some, of course, obviously only present for a much shorter period of time. So we can start to look at all of this phenomena as part of one bigger picture. And I think this is what's been missing from our investigation of UFOs and aliens. We've just assumed that UFOs are objects that come down here from another planet or another star system and do their thing, and then they go back to that particular star system. But it's a fact that the majority of UFOs are either objects of light or clusters of lights, and that they manifest on the spot. And then they might move around, but then they'll, boom, disappear again. That's the majority of UFO sightings. And I think we need to start looking at other possibilities as well as the concept of physical aliens coming down here. We need to be looking at the possibility there's something else going on around us. And I think that the answer is that there are beings who inhabit this 11-dimensional space that's around us that have the ability to be able to connect with us and to manifest in our space-time at will, quite literally, and that they are omnipotent, they are omnipresent, and they essentially are super intelligences, well beyond anything that we could really even conceive of today, but that they are there and that they may well have been helping with human progress since the beginning. And I mean the beginning. In Africa, as much as 1.5 million years ago, and that they've always been with us, they've always been around us. But because they are multidimensional in nature, it's difficult for us to look at them straight on, because we're three-dimensional creatures. That means we can only ever perceive a three-dimensional realm. If they are four-dimensional or multidimensional, we can't see them. We can only get an idea of what might be present there. And we have to interpret that in terms of religion, of cultural upbringing, different traditions. And I think sometimes we get that wrong. In the past, we've seen these entities as devils, as demons, of angels, and of course, in the modern day, we look at them purely in terms of extraterrestrials, you know, like little green men or greys or big Nordics or whatever else it is. But I think that a lot of this imagery is created by ourselves. It's part of the interaction between us and this phenomena, and that a lot of it is the product of what we think we are seeing, what we think we are experiencing, but that these intelligences, if they are multidimensional in nature or transdimensional as a term I use, then we don't stand a hope of actually seeing them full on. We cannot do it. You know, there are such beings as known as the shadow people. I mean, many people have seen them. They just seem to appear in a room, flit around, and then they disappear out. And it's possible that what people are seeing are these transdimensional beings at this time, that they may well be part of this phenomena. And we just need to be aware of this. So on the one hand, we may have physical aliens, physical spacecraft, and on the other, we could be dealing with an all-encompassing phenomena that is transdimensional in nature.
What is the role of consciousness, particularly the consciousness of humanity, in this entire picture?
I think that consciousness is crucial to understanding our relationship, not just with the phenomena, but the intelligences behind it. Within physics, there is something referred to as the observer principle or the observer effect. And what this is that if we observe experiments that are going on within a subatomic level, that we have an impact upon the result. And that, I believe, is something which can be carried to the macrocosm in the phenomena, the objects that we see, the UFOs, the beings, the light beings that we encounter, that our involvement in their presence can change what is actually going on. That's not to say that this phenomena is not present on its own, but that human consciousness interaction, as we refer to it, is perhaps 50% of everything that goes on. Take us out the picture, I think phenomena would still happen, because I mean there are some incredible pictures coming out of Mars, for instance, that show these lights that are appearing. I mean, they're very objective. They're probably made of plasma, the full state of matter, which I believe is very important to all of this. But if you place us on Mars and observe what was going on, I think that the phenomena would manifest more obviously as beings and craft and whatever in the same way that it does down here on Earth. In other words, we have an integral part in creating and manifesting that phenomena. That's not that it's not real, but that just we give it a helping hand to manifest in a way that we can accept and understand.
Andrew, I'm finding it's necessary to define the word real. What is real?
Well, that's a very good point. And I mean, when we talk in terms of phenomena, we're talking about something which we don't properly understand. And this is the big issue with dealing with multidimensional environments. We don't really understand it. We don't really understand the quantum world, you know, the subatomic world that coexists with us all the time. And physicists will openly stand up and say, look, if you think that you understand the quantum world, you've got it wrong, because we are still learning all of the time. But I think that we can get a handle on what's going on. And for the first time, I think that we're beginning to realize that UFOs, paranormal activity, cryptids, and other unusual activity are all part of a bigger whole, something that coexists with us, something that's been around not just for the last 70 odd years since the beginning of the flying saucer craze, but has been with us since the beginning. I mean, as I said, right the way to the birth of humanity in Africa as much as 1.5 million years ago.
Do you believe that whole is greater than the sum of its parts?
Do I believe that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? Well, all I know is that the intelligences that are behind this phenomena are so far advanced that in many ways the phenomena that they can produce is almost like them controlling puppets in a way. And I think that in many ways they can also manipulate us. They can affect our minds through telepathy. They can affect us through mind over matter. They can instill in us a connection with them, one that many people, after they've had UFO encounters, will retain for the rest of their life. And one of the reasons why they're able to do this is that they're beyond time. In our realm, our 3 dimensions of space and one of time, time only moves forward, or we see it as only moving forward. But in a multidimensional realm, time essentially doesn't exist. And because of that, the past still exists today. Activities that may have gone on in prehistoric times, shamanism, the building of stone circles, and other types of monument, they're still taking place because that time doesn't exist. It's not something that went on in the past. It's still going on now, just in the same way that this interview is occurring now and will always occur for the rest of the universe. This particular moment will continue on, so that has an impact, not only in what's happening in the here and now, but forever. In other words, when you go to certain locations which we deem portals or vortex sites, or window areas as they used to be called in the past, where lights and other paranormal activity take place, you often find that there are prehistoric sites associated with them, like standing stones or stone circles or earthen mounds, things like this, which shows that the ancients were aware of these sites and did their rituals there, often involving shamanism, the wearing of animal paraphernalia to take the form of that animal to enter into otherworldly realms and to communicate with otherworldly intelligences. Now, we may think that took place thousands of years ago, but no, it's still taking place now and can still affect what we see at the same location today. In fact, in many ways, it's forged what we see today and will always forge what it is. And if we go to those sites and we do meditations, we do rituals of any description, that's going to impact on that site forever. Because in a way, that ritual that you do at that site continues to take place. It's always taking place. Nothing is ever forgotten.
That's fascinating, and it suggests that perhaps there is a form of Akashic records that is recording everything. Is that potentially related to black holes, the Milky Way, or some other aspect of the cosmos?
Well, you talk in terms of the Akashic records. What are the Akashic records? Well, this was something that was heavily promoted by the American psychic named Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet. And he saw it as almost like this library on the astral that you could literally pull books from and open up and download that information. And that's actually how he perceived it when he would go off into his sleep states and receive information. But I think that it's more fundamental than that. I think that we can see it in terms of the entanglement of all. And what I mean by that is that we have this concept known as quantum entanglement. Entanglement means that particles can become twinned. They can, quite literally become twins. And no matter how far away they get from each other, they will still retain an instantaneous contact and link between each other. So what that actually means, that if you tweak one, the other one will always move in an equal and opposite direction, no matter how far away it gets. And that's one particle. If we can think of countless particles creating what we call entangled states, it starts to explain everything from telepathy to mind over matter to even to precognition. And those entangled states are in my head, they're equal and opposite parts could be in your head or anybody else's head. And so we were able to transfer information. In other words, if those particles in my head are doing a particular dance, that means they're also doing that same dance in your head. and that would be the conveyance of information and energy. And that's what we call telepathy or mind over matter. And now, if you then transfer that to the macrocosm, the greater world or the greater universe in which we live, it's now believed that entangled systems of particles could be behind what we term black holes. It could be the mouths of black holes, which are also known in science as Einstein-Rosen bridges. These are also more commonly known today as wormholes, that wormholes may exist through entangled systems of particles. In other words, you've got some on one side, and because they're entangled with those somewhere else, you have this instant transfer of information and mass and energy going from one to the other, and that this could be the explanation for all of this phenomena, and as well as that, also what's known as white holes. White holes are the opposite to black holes. Black holes, to put it simply, suck in energy and mass and information, whereas white holes spew it out, and they spew it out as what's known as plasma. And plasma is something which is integral to understanding multidimensional environments, entangled systems, and the creation of what we call atomic matter. In other words, everything around us in the physical world in which we live. And although all of this together, you think, well, how does it all come together? It's actually pretty easy to understand. And once you do start factoring all these things together, entanglement, plasma, multidimensional environments, and the idea that there are other consciousness, other intelligences, other beings involved here, then it starts to give us solutions to this phenomena which has so dogged humanity since the beginning, and I think may well be responsible for the creation of religions and other traditions and mythologies around the world. Indeed, as I say in the book, the origins of the gods themselves.
Andrew, you're painting a very multidimensional picture for us. I'm wondering how this metaphysical knowledge relates back to the ancient sites, megalithic temples, and ancient civilizations around the world that you have studied and even discovered in your research.
The key to answering that question is place, or location, as they say, because there are specific places around the globe that you could describe as portals or vortexes, or these used to be called window areas in the past. And these are where this phenomena occurs again and again. More obviously, lights and the appearance of what we would today call UFOs or UAPs. And there seems to be an integral relationship between the appearance of this phenomena and the ground itself, the geology. There are certain factors that crop up again and again, and that's tectonic activity. In other words, plates under the earth coming together, quite literally crashing together and creating huge pressure. This produces things like fault lines, micro faults, microplates. But in addition to this, certain types of rock, most obviously connected with volcanism, volcanoes, that has within it certain minerals, particularly quartz, tourmaline, that have the ability, when put under extreme stress, extreme pressure or bent, they will release from their atoms electrons that become free, and they move. And when they move, this creates what we know as electricity. I mean, electricity ultimately is just simply the movement from higher to lower potential of freed up electrons. And as this happens, not only do they create electromagnetic fields, but they will burst out through the rocks into the local environment to create environments that become ripe for the manifestation of UFOs. And that it's almost like the stuff they need to manifest. Now, quite clearly, not all UFOs manifest on the spot, as it were, or in the low atmosphere. I mean, somewhat clearly have been encountered in deep space, of course. But these environments of these freed up electrons, of which there are, countless of them that just rise up and exist, and it's the stuff that the UFOs need to manifest. And when they manifest, they create what's known as plasma. And what this is, the electrons become so excited and they bump into other atoms and free up their electrons, and they get excited and they bump into other, creating this chain reaction. And as this is happening, they release what are known as photons of light. Now, photons are subatomic particles, even smaller than electrons. And as this happens, you reach a critical stage, a critical point where suddenly, boom, you've got an object in front of you that's almost like a light bulb being switched on. And this can be a very small object. It can be huge. It can be quite thick. It can be traced on radar. It can be invisible. It also has solid nature. If you see it during the day, it will look silver. If you see it at night, it will look like a shining object. And it can be one light, it can be multiple lights, it can be different colors. And clearly, when you see this stuff in the sky, you're going to say, oh my God, that's a UFO. There's no question that will be a UFO. Once again, we must stress, this is not going to explain every UFO, every nuts and bolts spacecraft. It's not. But it can explain quite a large number of UFO sightings. But plasma itself, which is basically what's being created here, this is what it is. This is a plasma object, a plasmoid or a plasma construct, is that as it manifests, it seems to come alive. It seems to have its own sentience. And this is something that was noticed about plasma soon after it was first discovered in the 19th century by a British scientist and engineer by the name of William Crookes. And he referred to it as radiant matter. He was able to produce it inside these vacuum tubes and, was able to sort of show it during experiments to public audiences and whatever. He called it radiant matter. But eventually, the people that were studying it noticed how similar it was to the movement of the plasma within the blood of the body and said, look, I think we should call it plasma because of that. And a lot of research has taken place in the last 2 decades to suggest that plasma could be a life form in its own right. And in other words, we think of life forms in terms of carbon-based life or biological life, but it may well be that within plasma it becomes the environment where other intelligences are able to manifest. Now, there was a theoretical physicist who was American, Brazilian, and English. Spent a lot of time in the UK from about the 1950s onwards, 60s, by the name of David Bohm. And he did a lot of plasma physics. He studied plasma. He also came to the conclusion that plasma could come alive. And what he wrote is that it was an environment into which what he called proto-intelligence could rise up from a deeper level of existence, somewhere outside of normal space-time. He referred to this deeper level as the implicate order. And he believed genuinely that plasma could come alive because it was inhabited or could become inhabited by these intelligences. His colleague, Basil Hiley, referred to this implicate order, this deeper level of existence, as the pre-space. And it was a non-local medium, which means that it's not connected with by air. So in other words, it's not involved with pressure or one atom bumping into another, bumping into another. It's outside of that, outside of normal space-time. It's what they call a non-local medium. And that information and energy could be transferred through this medium instantaneously. It's the same medium that entanglement almost certainly is able to transfer information and energy. In other words, it's something that exists outside of our normal space-time that is almost like a sort of superhighway, if you like, for the transfer of information, energy, and by virtue of that, mass itself. And so there is something there, and I think that it is linked with this multidimensional realm that we spoke about earlier, which is known as the bulk. In many ways, it is the bulk. It coexists with us all the time. It's in the air around us. It's in the walls of this building. It's within you and I. Yeah, the bulk is within us. It's not simply something that's out there beyond our own physical universe. It's also within us as well. But if that's the case, does that suggest that we are also multidimensional beings? And in many ways, the answer to that is yes. The reason I say that is because in Switzerland, there was an institute by the name of the Blue Brain Project that are trying to completely map the human brain because they want to try and transfer human consciousness into AI. And what they have found is that the brain works on anything up to 11 dimensions of geometry. Now that's quite extraordinary because that's exactly the amount of dimensions involved with M theory, which is a branch of string theory. And if that's correct, then we are hardwired to operate on 11 dimensions. And it's in a way, it's something which is there ready to be used once we understand multidimensionality properly. It's a little bit like your smartphone. Your smartphone now is already got the hardware to use 5G networks, even though we haven't got any 5G networks, certainly in this country at the moment. It's like the same thing. It's hardwired, like our brains are hardwired to operate on 11 dimensions once it's present, once we understand how to connect with all of those other dimensions. And who knows, maybe we're already doing it. Maybe we're already connecting with higher dimensions through dreams, through visions, and through our understanding of the realms that coexist with us, our understanding of metaphysics and cosmology. Just maybe this is where all this information is coming from. I mean, maybe intuitively we have the answers within us already.
If indeed plasma exists within us and within everything, that would mean it also is in the stones of megalithic temples.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if these sacred sites are essentially stargates, portals, or vortexes to other dimensions within the 11th dimensional network that you speak of.
Absolutely. I mean, the portal locations where mysterious lights, UFOs, UAPs seem to be able to appear with regularity are also where you find the stone circles, the stones, the standing stones, the barrows. There is a relationship. It's like the ancients were very much aware of this light phenomena, that it was appearing back then. As I said, most people get this idea that UFOs are essentially a modern phenomena, that it's something that never really happened before Roswell in 1947. But this has been around with us forever. I mean, this was something that was worked out as early as the 1950s. People like Carl Jung wrote a book about flying saucers. The French researcher writer Jacques Vallée, who worked with NASA, he wrote a book called The Passport to Magonia, which was basically showing the relationship between the modern UFO phenomena and fairy lore, going back to medieval times and beyond, and also showing that the same type of phenomena was going on thousands of years ago, and we would interpret it as the appearance of devils and demons and mysterious lights associated with them. This is something that's coexisted with us. People that look in terms of disclosure, like, next year, we're going to have disclosure. we're going to have contact and the rest of it are going to be waiting for a very long time, in my opinion, because I think humanity has been waiting for this for millions of years, and I don't think it's necessarily going to all start happening next year. So that's not, as I said, to disrespect other people's views, because Carl Sagan, the great cosmologist and astronomer, as early as 1963, in a paper that he wrote that's really only recently resurfaced, talks about the idea of us being visited by extraterrestrials. And he concluded that it was inevitable that we'd been visited not just a few dozen times by aliens, but literally thousands of times during the course of humanity's history. And that we should even start looking in the Sumerian texts for evidence of this. And this is back in 1963. But unfortunately, shortly afterwards, he joined NASA as a consultant. And I happen to know from people that knew Carl Sagan that he was told to shut up about the aliens and whatever. Just please don't talk about this. This is bad for us. So he did. But no, he don't genuinely believe that, or he generally wrote about it. And so if you've got somebody like Carl Sagan saying this in the early 60s, who would I be to argue that? And I mean, there is ample evidence that's presented by many of my colleagues to suggest that ancient aliens existed in a physical form. I've studied many mythologies around the world where they do talk about beings coming down, objects bringing them down. They live amongst humans. They could even mate with them. And then in some of the stories, they go back to the sky from where they came from. I mean, whether you're talking about the Eurasian continent, whether you're talking about the Pacific, whether you're talking about Native American law, it's all there. I mean, you can't deny it. And this is not something that's been created in modern times. It's in old books on folklore and legends and mythology. And you have to look at these stories and say, well, look, there's something in this. So the idea of physical aliens is real. But, as I said, what I want to stress is that there's something else going on as well. And that relates to transdimensional intelligences, M beings being able to contact and connect with us on various levels using various types of phenomena.
Speaking of the ancient alien astronaut theory and sacred sites, you've been looking into the hyperdimensional qualities of Israel's Kesem caves. I'm wondering why you are focusing in on this particular Paleolithic archaeological site near Tel Aviv.
Yeah, the Kesem cave is a very interesting place. I mean, before we go on any further, the word Kesem is actually a Hebrew word which means divination. It can also mean occult or magic or whatever, although that could be a coincidence because the Kesem cave, which, as you mentioned, is just outside of Tel Aviv, was only discovered in the year 2000 as they were creating a new highway from the Mediterranean coast through to the Sumerian hills and beyond it into the Palestinian West Bank. And they were using explosives to blast their way through rocky outcrops so that they could build this road. And during one of these explosions, they noticed that there was whole areas of bones and stone tools. So, they have to put down their own, tools, everything, construction stops. And they then tender it out to archaeologists to come and investigate it. And the contract was won by the archaeologists of Tel Aviv University. And they came out there, and they started investigating. And over a period of the next 16 years, they uncovered some extraordinary stuff. Now, it was on my radar, but it wasn't until 2019 when a certain announcement was made about what they'd found that I really started taking an interest to such a degree that I just dropped everything and just went out to Israel. And this was the fact that they found, amongst all this debris, an area of the cave which seems to be almost like a holy of holies, almost like a sort of, an alcove where quite clearly they put their most precious material. And in there, they discovered this wing bone of a swan. And they looked at it, and it had been very clearly modified. And what I mean by that is that the feathers had been deliberately removed from it, and that it had been deliberately cleaned, and the marks still were present. And the archaeologists concluded in a paper, and then obviously through press releases, that this was evidence of shamanism. A shaman is a person who is able to transfer between the physical world and otherworldly realms, to communicate with otherworldly beings on a regular basis, using altered states of consciousness, or trance states as they referred to it. And they will go there to communicate with the spirits, to bring back information, or to do healing, or possibly even to do curses, or whatever else it is that they want to do. And here we had the oldest evidence anywhere in the world of shamanism, and the age of it, 400,000 years ago. I mean, this is just extraordinary. And in addition to this, they were using these stone balls that were multifaceted, which, according to the archaeologists, they were holding in their hand and using to connect with these other realms and to connect with these spirit intelligences. And I'm reading this and thinking, this is just extraordinary. But to add on to that, these people, I call them the Kazem people, were becoming the smartest people on the planet at the same time. And a whole number of firsts for humanity were taking place here. The earliest canned food. They would kill deer, immediately chop the legs off, and they found a way of wrapping and preserving them so that they could access the marrow inside the bone, which was very nutritious, and they would use as a snack, so that they could wrap it up, chuck it in their backpacks, and go off on their forays for a few months or whatever. And they had ready-made meals, the earliest canned food, the earliest freezers. They were able to not freeze fry in the way that we know food, but to preserve food by wrapping it immediately in ash in such a way that it could preserve it across months. The earliest production of so-called blade tools, really beautiful tools, which only really come into their own much later, as much as 15, 20,000 years ago. And yet here they were being produced on a production line. They had the earliest school of rock. When I say this is the term that was used in the press for what appears to be areas of the cave where pupils would come in and learn the trade of how to make these different types of tools. And each different area was designated for a different reason. The earliest sustained use of fire pits over an incredibly long period of time. The earliest use of fire to temper tools. I mean, it just goes on. Now, these might not seem like rock and roll to us, as far as our own progress in the last 100 years are concerned. But for humanity, they were shooting ahead of everybody else. So can it be coincidence that at the same time, they're amongst the first people in the world to be able to communicate with otherworldly intelligences? In other words, were they being fed information for new innovations and technology by these otherworldly sources? The Kazem people were going to Mount Gerizim, this was the name of this mountain, to get the raw materials for their tools. They obviously saw this mountain as particularly special, and they would then bring back this raw material, create their tools. And I think that they were doing that to sustain this link with the mountain. I found that the mountain itself still produces lights to this day. They've been interpreted as UFOs and flying saucers, but I decided that I would not just go to the Kazem cave, but then go into the Palestinian West Bank and climb this mountain to try and talk with the elders, the elderly priests of this community that lived there, called the Samaritans, who claim to be the direct descendants of the Israelites. So I climbed this mountain and was able to talk to one of the senior priests, and I said, you know, these lights, they're certainly known historically. Do they still appear today? And he said, yes, absolutely. I said, well, how are they interpreted? And the word that he used was malak, which means angels. So to the Samaritans, these lights, which we interpret today as UFOs and UAPs, they see as the messengers of God, evidence of the presence of God himself on that mountain to this day. So can we dare suggest that the Kazem people were seeing the same lights and were also interpreting the intelligence, the entity associated with this mountain as some kind of God that they could communicate with through shamanism, through the use of the swan bone, through the use of these stone spheres, multifaceted, early crystal balls, if you like, and that this is what they were doing. They were contacting the earliest ancient aliens, basically.
Andrew, you are making some incredible revelations that really suggest a true interconnectivity between ufology, ancient civilizations, and the supernatural or multi-phenomena. One of the themes of this conference that I've noticed emerging is the lost civilization of Atlantis. I want to apply your research. How can we really draw from your vast library of work and apply the lessons we have learned from Atlantis to the current situation that is quite precarious that humanity finds itself in today?
Well, I think that Atlantis is a cautionary tale. It's the story that's told by Plato around 350 BC. He was a Greek philosopher. And in his book, the Timaeus, and also in another book called the Critias, he talks about how Atlantis grew so large, but also so haughty, that eventually it started to implode in on itself to such a degree that they were warned. They were said, look, if you take this path of destruction, the god Zeus will strike you down. And that's exactly what happened. According to Plato's account, in one night and in one day, in floods, earthquakes and floods, Atlantis disappeared beneath the waves. But of course, the belief is today that the legacy of Atlantis is still with us. You know, it is the evidence of the lost technology that we have in the different civilizations, not only in the old world, but also in the new world. The evidence of the pyramids, the evidence of writing, the evidence of religions that are all similar. In many ways, Atlantis is still with us today, and we are relearning that knowledge now. And that because of that, we also, therefore, must not go down the same road as Atlantis to become too haughty, too arrogant and be destroyed again, because the memory of that cataclysm is real. There was a cataclysm that devastated our world around 13,000 years ago and had reverberations for about 1,200 years, even creating a mini ice age known as the Younger Dryas. And that knowledge that we are learning today, not only must we not misuse it, but on top of that, we must be aware that another cataclysm, another comet impact, which we think is what caused this other event that destroyed Atlantis, that we must be aware that it could happen again and prepare for that.
We have very wise words and a really strong, poignant warning from the great author and researcher, Andrew Collins. I'm Kristen Gillespie, your Conscious Investigative Reporter. Thank you so much, Andrew, for enlightening us today.
Thank you.